I joined Google full-time. Oh, sorry, did someone say something?
Sorry about that. No, I think you're good.
Yeah, cool. Yep, and then I joined Google full-time, and I'm now a full-time designer, UX designer at, on Google Analytics specifically. Cool. So, like, what do I do at work, or like, what do designers do at work? I think for a lot of CS students or people in tech, this is maybe what you think of as design, but this is like definitely not my expertise or what I do at all. Or you might think it's sort of like this, which, my dad still thinks that I am an engineer, even though I'm a designer, so this is more what he thinks I do at work, but it's not this either. I think UX design looks a little bit more like this. I like to say that I'm a rectangle organizer, but it's a lot of just like drawing rectangles and moving them around until they feel right and arguing about rectangles. But yeah, so it looks a little bit more like this. And then specifically in tech, there's like a few different roles. This is not comprehensive. But visual design is typically what I think people think UX is. There's like visual designers, there's interaction designers, which is what I do, writers, PMs, researchers, etc. But then like the question is, but what actually is like user experience design then? It's not visual design and it's not really art. It's sort of like the intersection of a lot of things, which everyone says about their job, but it is also. So it's sort of like the intersection between like art and creativity, which you need, but then also like human psychology and understanding like human behavior and how people think. And then also, then there is a big piece of technology, which is like vital to being good at UX. Cool. So for more like what actually is user experience. So I don't know if anyone has seen this picture before, but it's a pretty classic one in terms of user experience design. So you can see like there's a couple of paths. You might have this on campus at Berkeley, but there's like sidewalks that carve out a very specific path. But then there's the path that actual human beings have carved out themselves from their actual usage, right? So you might think of the pathway as like what the UI is, or like what the user interface is. And then there's kind of like the end path off here as like what the user experience actually is. So you might have like designed the path and the intention was for people to walk on the path, but what do actual human beings do in the real world is like they carve their own like beaten sidewalk thing. And so UX lives more in the world of like not what does the path look like, but what do actual human beings need and what will they actually use. So another common example that people use is like around ketchup. So you can see the bottle on the right is like this really kind of like cute, sleek glass bottle. And this is again more of UI, like what does it look like? But the better UX is actually like a squeeze bottle. So if you consider how somebody is actually using a ketchup bottle every single time, with the one on the left, they're going to have to, the ketchup saddle is at the bottom. So the user would have to pick it up and turn it over and like hit it a couple times. And it's just not a great experience versus like the squeezy bottle, which is, if the ketchup saddle is at the bottom, then if the cap is on the bottom, it's a lot easier every single time you use it. And so you can see the one on the right is the better user experience. And another common one is doors. So the question is sort of like, what does the handle tell you? There's something in UX called affordances. And so a door handle, you would think actually is like an affordance to pull. So if you see a door handle, you might think like, oh, this is a pull door. But if you've ever tried to pull one of these, then you can see if you tried to pull this one, but it's actually a push door. That wouldn't work out very well. So it's kind of like, what does the handle tell you, but like, what does the sign say? So this is the metaphor to digital design is sort of like you might have the right text, or the text might explain what the right thing to do is, but if the actual, screen or buttons or affordances pushing a user to do something else, then that might cause problems, right? So you can imagine like what the store might tell you if there was no handle. then it would feel more like a push store. Or it would be obvious to you that you would push it. You would have to read the sign or think about it. So a little bit more formally, UI is like the user interface and what it looks like, whereas UX is, what it feels like, how it works, and whether or not it's actually solving or successful at solving a user's problem. Well, I'll stop there. If there's any questions or intros. You can use the chat, you can talk out loud. Yeah, definitely okay. Cool, okay, I'll keep going. Again, so art is a little bit more about like feelings and emotions, interpretations, and how does like a visual make you feel? How can you express yourself creatively and think about like, or it's thought-provoking. Whereas UX is a lot more about like problem solving, efficiently communicating information, guiding and instructing, and you do use creativity, but it's under like very tight constraints in the same way that you use creativity when you're coding. It is a very creative field as well, but it is a lot less of like, if you don't want the screen to be open to interpretation, right? So a huge principle in UX, or like, I guess, modern day design, is that the user should be at the heart of every product decision that you make. So this is where like the psychology and human empathy comes in, but it's really about building for the user first. So this is a big thing that, when I was in hackathons or like looking at projects that you see come out a lot, it's a problem that happens a lot, which is, someone builds something for themselves, or they build something for how they might use it without considering how other people might see it or how other people might use it. So just because like a path or a screen or a button is intuitive to you doesn't mean that it's intuitive to other people. And this is a major pitfall of a lot of people who are just making products without considering design or humans. So again, with design, we want to ask some questions. So it's like, what problems do we actually need to solve is how you start off the design process. Building it is more of like, how are we actually solving that problem? And then afterwards, you want to evaluate like what feedback or what things you need to get to make your product better and iterate on. Cool. So with actually defining a problem, so as you're going into the hackathon, I'm sure you have a lot of like concepts that you're thinking of building and using this time to focus on. And am I right in that this hasn't started yet? Like people haven't started coding yet?
They have started.
Sorry, they have or haven't?
They have started.
Yeah, it's
enough. Okay, cool, it's enough. Okay, cool. So you have already started coding, so you probably already have like a problem or something in mind that you're actually working on. But what I'm going to share right now is really useful for like guiding, your building process, and also if you're presenting to like judges or presenting your project to like a team, or even later on in like portfolio, you really want to have a really clear problem definition. It might be obvious to you, but again, to communicate it to others, it's really useful to have this like problem definition, and it'll give you like a leg up in those situations. Cool. So this template is sort of like a person or like the specific users that you want. They want something to do X. So this is where you fill in like what your product actually does, and then you say so that user can, and then you fill in with what the benefit to that user is. So I'm gonna just give you the example. So this is an example for like Audible, for example. So this might be like the specific users that we're looking at are audiobook lovers, and they want something to do X, right? And so in X, you actually fill out like what it is that your product is solving. So audiobook lovers want something to listen, store, organize, discover new audiobooks, so that they can, and then do Y, right? And then Y is like I said here, it's what the benefit of your product is to that specific person. So in this case, I said so they can, feel fulfilled and expand their knowledge on the go. And so I think that the crux of this is, number one, it clarifies to yourself and your team who you're actually building for, and to anybody that you're communicating with. Number two, it does explain in a very short sentence what your product actually does. And then finally, it explains the emotions and the sort of passion or purpose behind what you're building. And so the reason that it's useful is because it helps to block from building something that you think might be cool, but other people won't actually use, or no one actually understands what it is that you're doing. And so the last piece is a lot more again, filled with emotion, and it's more compelling or appealing to humans. So if I had just said they want something to discover new audiobooks so they can listen to new audiobooks or something, without that why, it's not really that compelling. And so again, if you're presenting or even just guiding your own problem or your own projects, it's really useful. So I recommend having a problem statement, problem definition. And then there's a couple of principles, or I want to explain what design principles are. And this is something that it might seem a little hand wavy or abstract, but it is very useful in clarifying your direction. And if you have, conflicts as a team, or you're I'm not sure what we should build, it's useful to have some of these principles in your back pocket to pull out in those times. So design principles basically are just a set of values that act as your compass for the product. It's basically an agreed upon truth. So they're guideposts that the whole team can move towards with the design process or the building process. And everyone agrees that these are the principles they're carrying forward with them. And yeah, they should be specific, nuanced, actionable, etc. This is a truth or something that I use just in my own daily life. I have my own set of values and principles that help guide what decisions I make. And so for your own product, you also want to have that. And so I have a couple of examples here. So there's Airbnbs and Pinterests and Asanas. So I included Asana because Asana is more of an enterprise tool, or the type of user that you would build for is more of using it for business. And so Asana doesn't want to necessarily be fun and playful because it's a more serious product, whereas Pinterest is a social media. So it does make sense for them to be a little bit more fun, and their principles animated, right? So it makes sense to be colorful and visually responsive, unexpected, whereas that kind of principle would be detrimental to Asana, which is a lot more of a serious workplace kind of product. So you can see how even just the principle of playful or animated might be very useful in Pinterest, but not so much for Asana. Cool. Okay, question, I think. How does having specific design principles affect the creativity? That's a really good question. So the creativity aspect of design is actually using your creativity under constraints. So actually the best designs end up coming out of having very strict constraints. So for, again, Asana is something that you don't want to be playful. It has to be very serious. But then it actually is more useful to have that constraint, because then it's not just oh, the whole world is open to me, I can do whatever I want with design. It just makes it a lot more clear, okay, here's this one avenue, and then I can be creative within this avenue. Yeah, similar to another example at work that comes up is there's YouTube and then there's YouTube Kids. So YouTube is YouTube can use a lot of words and things like that, but YouTube Kids is you actually can't use words as much because kids can't read sometimes. So it's oh, okay, let's be more creative but using visuals. Versus Asana, which is we actually need to use words and less visuals. Cool. And then I added this thing called the golden path, because I think it'll be useful for, so we talked about your problem statement, how do you define what is you're actually building and solving for. Then two, the principles, which are, what are the set of values that you take with you as you build. And again, with principles, I recommend sitting down as a team, even if you've already started building, and just decide on what are the 2 or 3 values that we all agree on as common truths, whether it's like to be playful or to be serious or something. I recommend doing that. And then the next piece that, as you're building, I really want you to consider is the golden path. So the golden path is basically like for you to consider what are the specific goals that you want your product or you want your user to achieve with your product, right? So I'm going to go back a few slides. So the kind of the one that's like, what is the job that your product does? When it says like listen, store, organize, discover, etc. So for an audiobook, for example, the specific golden path or goal that you would want is for a user to find an audiobook and listen to it and finish listening to it. So that's kind of like the golden path in that example. And so, yeah, so it's basically the key steps that a user can take to find the value that they came to your product to do in the first place. So we have basically like, this one is for actually purchasing a product. So user visits, and they search, and they can view a product or look at recommendations, then they might buy or edit their order, and then actually receive that product and maybe love the product. So this is kind of the golden path that you want to take a user through on an e-commerce site. But for your own site or your own product or whatever it is that you're building, you'd be surprised at how useful it is to clarify what this golden path actually is. And maybe as a team, like sit down and write this out on a whiteboard and just like leave it up. It can actually help you evaluate how successful your design is or how successful your product is at like actually achieving those product goals. So yeah, I'd recommend that. Cool. Okay, and then let's say that you've done all of that, you defined your golden path, you coded the first MVP or the first prototype. How do you actually know if your product is achieving what it is that you set out to do? So there's these things called heuristics. It doesn't really matter what it's called, but they're sort of things you want to keep in mind as to how you can actually evaluate how successful your design is or your product is in general. The first one seems obvious, but it's just basic usability. Like, can people use your product? And you'd be shocked at how often this is the answer is no. So usability more specifically is like, can these specific users that you're building for achieve the specific goals effectively, efficiently, and be like without frustration or like satisfactory? So that's what usability is. And a way of like testing that with your product, you think it would be like to go through the golden path yourself. So like the first way is to just like go through the golden path yourself and see how easy, how quick, how without frustration that process actually was. But a much better way to do it is to actually find the specific users that you're actually targeting and have them go through it. Because let's say your hackathon project is like something to teach like children, refugees, how to speak like a language from where they are, or from where they're currently at. So you might be able to use the app and you might be able to find the golden path, but if you don't actually give the product to that specific user, so it's like to a child who can't speak the language, then you have no idea if your product is actually like successful, right? So that sort of usability, I think the key is specific users and specific goals, because it's not really about you, it's about the people that you're building for. Even if you think you are the target user, you still need to, test usability with others who are not you. And the second one is it's basically related. It's one of the keys of usability, but it's how easy is it to use. So sometimes like this is like, is it designed for only a specific user? Is it designed for everybody? Are some key questions. And sometimes like your product shouldn't be easy to use, but for the specialized user, it should at least be like somewhat easy as they go along or as they learn. So like in Google Analytics, for example, we have like users who are, I just built a website and I have no idea about anything about data. And then we have users who are like data scientists, like analyzing every single day. And so our product has to be easy to use for both of those people and be like effective at accomplishing their goals. And then to dive more into like what efficiency actually means, it just means can that user complete their task from start to finish. And like, yeah, that's basically efficiency, not too complicated. Another thing you might want to consider is like the learning curve. So is your product, not how easy is it to use, but how easy is it to learn? So if you are like a Google Analytics or like a Photoshop or something, or Xcode, something that's more, there is like a learning curve, it is more difficult to use. The question is like, how simple is it, not for someone to understand initially, but how difficult is it for them to learn in a short period of time? And again, some products like have to have a high learning curve, but as a principle, you kind of want to shorten that learning curve as much as possible. And then there's also user control and freedom. So the caption here is like, is this forcing someone down a specific path? But I think that's a little bit unclear, more general. The common pitfall that I see people do in hackathons specifically is like not get a back button. So user control and freedom is sort of like, how easy is it for somebody to like recover or to do something and then get back if that's not what they wanted to do. So you can imagine if you were like, you know, like posting something on Instagram, if you don't have like an exit button or a back button or something, and you're just forcing somebody, like if you hit post, you now have to post, that's like a violation of user control and user freedom. So that's another thing to keep in mind. And the really interesting one is about how to use like metaphors and real world concepts in your systems. So is there a match between what the symbols that you're using in your product are and the real world? So a pretty basic example of this is like a folder structure. So your OS, like, or in the visual version of your OS, you have like a folder structure. And you can see actually the icon is a literal folder, and in the real world, humans understand like what a folder is, and so it makes sense like, oh, my files go into a folder, which go into another folder, and so that symbol like matches my concept of what folders are in real life. But if you're using folders not in that way, like you're using folders to actually mean something else in your product, then it can get very confusing. And so you want to make sure that like whatever metaphors or concepts that you're using match the real world or match to like what is in a user's actual head and how they would think about it. And the last one was just pretty intuitive, but the last one is consistency. So you want to make sure you're using like the same symbols, icons, words, etc. to mean the same things throughout your app. So if let's say that you have like a user profile, for example, and on one page you call this user profile, but on another page you call it like user settings, it was very confusing to me to be like, is this the same page? It's like I would not know what was going on, sort of. So you want to make sure that you're using like consistent terminology, consistent visuals, icons, etc. You want to make the product feel like the same throughout and like consistent throughout the app. Cool. And with all of these things that I mentioned, like the crux of good UX is actually that you don't notice it. And so you might say like with consistency, it's like, yeah, that seems so obvious. But as you go through like your own phone or laptop or whatever digital products that you use, you're not actually thinking about this. You're not like, oh, this word profile is used on every single page. The only time that you notice these things are when they're not there. So you'll only notice it if it is inconsistent. So good UX is actually pretty invisible, which makes it kind of like not that cute. You think it's not that cute because it's like, oh, I can't actually see any of it. But yeah, anyways, the crux of UX is like actually you can only tell if it's bad, not when it's good. Cool. And then just to chat about like some different resources of how you can actually get started with design. I would say for a hackathon, it's actually most useful to just use like pen and paper and like map out what the different flows are. So like map out the golden path by hand, even like draw your screens with rectangles first, just to like be like pretty quick. But if you do want to use some tools to actually design your screens, I would suggest Figma. There's Figma and there's Sketch, but Figma is like it's like an open, it's like a browser app. It's free, and you can collaborate in like a Google Docs kind of fashion with your team. So I would recommend using Figma. But both of these tools do have sort of a high learning curve. So again, pen and paper does work pretty well, or even like Google Draw. And then if you're looking for actual like design inspiration, so not like actually drawing your screens, but just like what do other screens look like? What are other patterns that products use? These 3 sites are pretty useful. So Dribble is people will post their own. Like let's say that you're building a login page and you just like want a reference as to what like a regular login page looks like. You could go on your own phone and look up a login page, or you can go to like dribbleandpatterns.com. And they'll have actual examples as to like what good UI looks like, and what are like the established kind of like agreed upon patterns, because you don't want to just like reinvent the wheel, especially if what you're designing is like, or what you're building is like really innovative tech. For example, you don't want to have to sit there and like design a login screen if what you really want to focus on is like, you know, the algorithm or something. So yeah, Dribble and patterns and sometimes Pinterest are really useful at just like showing you what the established patterns are, and you can just kind of riff off them. And then there's a couple books as well. The Design of Everyday Things is sort of like the design put on, basically. Cool. And then I included a video in here, but we definitely don't need to watch it. So yeah, that's the end of my talk. So if you have any questions, feel free to drop them or reach out to me. I'll just pause here for like some questions and then we can wrap up.
Yeah, if you have any questions, please unmute yourself and ask your questions.
Yeah, and let me know if there's anything on Facebook as well. Okay, so the question is like, are there any like showcases or portfolios using Figma that I can show? So I think yes. Let me log into Figma. These are going to be old because I can't actually show my like work Figma, but I can show you my like university Figma. Cool. Let me see. There's actually one that could be kind of useful. Let me look for it. Let's throw back to Dania, or it's my capstone project actually. Also, if you want to learn Figma, there's like some really great tutorials on YouTube. Okay, it looks like this is not that fleshed out, but basically I can still show you like what Figma does or looks like. So again, it's basically just rectangles. It's like rectangles and text. So you can see like there's a canvas, and then you can add different like rectangles to it and just like move things around. Or grab like, this is like a photo image, so you can add a screenshot there. Yeah, or you can like add text. I think I can't actually edit this one for some reason. Let me go back to my files. Yeah, here we go. Cool. This is like actually this might be interesting to see how you actually map out a product and how you can map out your own user flows. So I did like a user journey map of Visco, the Visco app. So I basically said like, you know, this is a mapping out of like the golden path for Visco. So it was like, how do you actually like start from the home screen and then edit a photo all the way to actually like publishing a photo. So that's what this map is. But yeah, so for Visco, it's kind of like, or sorry, with Figma, you can like create rectangles, like, oops, that was text. You can like add rectangles like this. You can just like add text. Let's make the text bigger. Yeah, you can just like add text and then, you know, change the color, like opacity, things like that. And so that's kind of where I'm like, basically design is all just rectangles, because this is actually like the basis of all of design and what you base your UIs off of. But the really cool thing too about Figma is that it actually, there's a community tab. And so if you're like, kind of like, I don't want to think at all about design, I just want to like actually build this thing and code it, there's a lot of these kits that you can use that actually like give the design of a lot of common pages for you. So let me open one of these. Yeah, cool. So you can see like now I have access to all of these screens, and I can like, let's say that I'm making an app and I'm just like, okay, I'm really happy with the sign-in page. I don't really want to change much to it. Maybe I just want to like edit this text, so then I could say like anything here, basically. And you can just kind of use this as a template and like change the color or something. But it basically makes it easy, so like you don't have to reinvent the wheel for anything. And you can kind of just use these established patterns as you code. And there is also like, this is both for like apps and websites as well, but I think there's like an inspect tab. I don't know if you can see it that well, but you can like kind of copy the CSS of the screens, so you can like design them and then use like the styling of them for the front end if that's something you want to do. Yeah, so it's pretty useful if you, number one, if you just want like templates to see like what you can build or how to lay things out. And also this is like just for the screen piece, but then there's also what I think is like even more useful is like I showed you with like how do you actually draw out the golden path inside of Figma. You can actually create that golden path. So if you can see these like little links between each of these, it's showing you like if you click the send button, it'll take you to this screen. So you can actually draw out the golden path and different user flows and things like that inside of Figma. And then if you hit like this play button, you can actually use the prototype in Figma, and it looks like you're using an actual app, even though it's not coded. It does take a second to load. Yeah, so you can kind of see like, this one isn't a great example. I didn't make it. But normally what would happen is these things are clickable, so then you can click like next, and then it would actually move to the next screen. So it looks like you can get a feel for what your product actually looks and feels like without actually coding it, which can save you like basically hours and hours of coding time. Cool. Yeah, I would definitely recommend the samples, and there's so many of them too that you basically never need to design your own like navigation or your own like login or homepage, things like that. Cool. You can, or the question is, can Figma let you convert a design into like actual code or HTML, CSS? So you can't actually do that yet, I don't think. There's another product called Framer. Let me write it in the chat. Yeah, there's a product called Framer that actually does do that. So it's sort of like you can drag like rectangles and things around, and it does actually translate it into code like live. I haven't actually used it though. I think it's like in beta still with that specific feature. But it's a good question, and that is like where the future of design tools are going. It's sort of like once you build the design, it'll just like write the code along with it, which is pretty sick. Let me see if I can open Frame. I think Framer is the right one. Yeah. Yeah, so Framer is like you can start wireframing and then hand it off to engineers like very quickly, or to yourself to the engineer. But yeah, so that's another tool as well. It's pretty cool. And then in terms of like Figma, and Sketch does the same thing. This like inspect tab on the top right, it gives you at least like some kind of start with the CSS, but cool. Are there any other questions? Yeah, no problem. I'm also happy to talk about like, can you launch on the App Store from Figma without coding? I wish, although a lot of people, I think, and might not be too happy about that. No, I don't think that's possible. You could just like take a screenshot or something. You can't launch the App Store, but you can like post it on your personal website, and everyone will think that it's a real app. Yeah, cool. And then I'm also, yeah, I'm happy to like if you have questions about your actual projects, or want like another set of eyes or like a design critique or something on your own projects. And again, by design critique, I'm not going to be like the colors are ugly or like the font is weird. It's just going to be more like, is this actually usable? Are there any common pitfalls that would stop somebody from being able to accomplish their goals? But yeah, if there's one thing that you take away from this, is basically like make sure that you have other people use your product or use your project and see if they can actually accomplish that goal. Oh, awesome. Yeah, the best way to reach out to me would be through LinkedIn, which is just I think I'm the only Dania Abdulhamid, but maybe not. Maybe I'm just egotistical. Yeah, so on LinkedIn, it's just Dania Abdulhamid on LinkedIn, or my email, which is bxmia@google.com, which is also my Instagram handle. You can DM me on Instagram if you want. I actually will probably respond faster that way, but I don't know if that's being translated. Is the chat being translated to Facebook Live or not? But you can give everyone my handles or emails in there as well. Okay, cool. Yeah, if there's no other questions, then we can probably wrap up or end early. But yeah, feel free to reach out to me for sure.
Thank you very much, Dania. That was very helpful and great introduction for designing. And I see from people that they're very appreciated. Thank you very much. I really like it and enjoyed it. Thank you for joining us and helping our hackathon and our teams here.
Yeah, cool. Thank you so much, everyone. Good luck.
So, yeah. Bye, everyone.